The night air, thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive champagne, was supposed to be Julian Vance's coronation. From the terrace of his glass-walled mansion, he looked out at the city lights, a kingdom he had built from nothing. Beside him, the ambitious and beautiful Isabel Croft shimmered, her hand possessively on his arm. He was about to toast to the future, a future with her. But he didn't know his real future, the one that truly mattered, was driving up the winding road to his front gate. He didn't know his wife, Eleanor, the woman he'd left upstairs with a convenient headache, was on her way. She wasn't coming with tears or accusations. She was coming with a quiet strength he'd long forgotten, a secret in her womb he couldn't imagine, and a single piece of paper in her hand that would bring his glittering, counterfeit world crashing down around him. The party was obscene, even by Julian Vance's standards, which was precisely the point. Ice sculptures dripped onto imported marble floors, a string quartet played a Vivaldi piece that no one was listening to, and the clinking of champagne flutes was the evening's true soundtrack. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a declaration. At 34, Julian had clawed his way from a cramped apartment with a perpetually worried mother to this, a sprawling monument to his own ambition overlooking the entire city. He felt a hand slide into his. Isabel "Izzy" Croft. She was 26, sharp as a shard of glass, and wore a red dress that was an event in itself. She was his star marketing director, and for the last 6 months, his secret. "They're all eating out of your hand," she murmured, her voice a low purr. Julian squeezed her hand, a jolt of something electric and dangerous running through him. "It's not me they're interested in, Izzy. It's the money." "Don't be so cynical," she smiled, but they both knew it was true. The men gathered were sharks, investors, rivals, partners, all circling, smelling opportunity. He scanned the crowd, a flicker of unease piercing his triumphant haze. Eleanor should have been here. He'd told her to stay upstairs, to rest. Her migraines had been getting worse, and he'd used it as the perfect excuse. The guilt was a dull ache, easily ignored. He told himself it was kinder this way. A clean break. He would tell her tomorrow, away from all these prying eyes. He'd be generous. He was always generous. His business partner, a portly man named Marcus, clapped him on the shoulder. "Julian, quite the shindig. Where's the lovely Eleanor?" Julian's smile didn't falter. It was a skill he'd perfected. "Under the weather, unfortunately, but she sends her best." He felt Izzy stiffen slightly beside him, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise. Soon. Later, when the night had deepened and the champagne had worked its magic, Julian decided it was time. He stepped onto a small elevated platform where the quartet had been playing. He tapped a glass with a spoon, the clear, high-pitched ring cutting through the chatter. A hush fell over the terrace. He held his glass high, his other hand finding Izzy's and drawing her to his side. She looked surprised, then thrilled. This was more than she'd expected. Her eyes shone with victory. "Friends, partners," Julian began, his voice smooth and confident. "Thank you for coming to celebrate our latest success. For years, I've focused on building an empire of assets and acquisitions." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He looked directly at Izzy, his voice softening. "But I've come to realize the most important asset isn't a company. It's a future. It's the person you want to build that future with." A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus's eyes widened. This was not on the agenda. "So I want to make another introduction tonight," Julian continued, his heart pounding with a reckless thrill. He was rewriting his own life in real time. "Many of you know Isabel as a brilliant mind at Vance Holdings, but I want you to know her as I do." He took a breath, the point of no return. "As the woman I intend to spend the rest of my life with. As my future wife." A wave of shocked silence was followed by a smattering of confused, then obligatory applause. Izzy's face was a mask of pure ecstasy. She leaned in and kissed him, a public claiming. And it was in that exact moment, as their lips met under the glare of 100 judgmental eyes, that the world stopped. The heavy glass doors leading from the house to the terrace slid open. There stood Eleanor. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. The absence of hysterics was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. Eleanor Vance stood framed in the doorway, a portrait of unnerving calm. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that he'd always loved. It clung to her frame, and for the first time, Julian noticed the gentle, unmistakable swell of her stomach. The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. Pregnant. The word echoed in the sudden, vast silence of his mind, drowning out the confused whispers of his guests. The air on the terrace, once warm and celebratory, turned sharp and cold. Every eye swiveled from the triumphant couple on the platform to the solitary woman in the doorway. Eleanor's gaze wasn't on the crowd. It was fixed on him. Her eyes, usually so warm, were like chips of winter ice. They held a universe of disappointment, but beneath it, a bedrock of strength he hadn't seen in years. He realized with a sickening lurch that he had mistaken her quiet support for weakness. He had mistaken her patience for passivity. He had been a fool. Izzy's hand flew from his, her face draining of color. The triumphant glow was gone, replaced by a ghastly pallor of humiliation. She looked from Julian to Eleanor, her mind clearly racing, connecting dots that now formed a picture of her own delusion. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor walked forward. The crowd parted for her as if she were royalty. She didn't look at Izzy, she didn't look at Marcus, or any of their so-called friends. She stopped a few feet from the platform, creating an invisible line in the marble floor. She held up her hand, and it was a single, tri-folded document. "Julian," she said, and her voice was impossibly steady. It carried across the silent terrace, clear and final. "I'm glad you're thinking about the future, because I've been thinking about it too." Julian felt a tremor of real fear. This was not the Eleanor he knew. This was someone forged in the fire of his betrayal. "You're right," she continued, her eyes never leaving his. "It's important to know what your assets are, to understand what truly belongs to you." She took another step closer and held out the paper. Her hand was steady. He stared at it, refusing to take it. He knew, with a dawning horror, what it was. It was the deed to the house she had inherited the land for from her grandparents, the house she had spent a year designing as the brilliant architect she was before putting her career on hold to support his. He'd paid for the construction, but the land, the foundation, the very soul of the place, that was all her. In a moment of what he'd thought was love, and she'd insisted was legal prudence, the final deed had been put solely in her name. He called it a technicality. "I believe you and your guest have mistaken my home for a public venue," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, laced with steel. "This party is over. I want you all to leave my house. Now." She then looked past Julian, her gaze finally landing on Izzy for the first time. It wasn't a look of anger. It was worse. It was pity. "And you," she said to Julian, her voice breaking just for a fraction of a second before she mastered it. "You can go with her." She let the deed fall from her fingers. It fluttered to the marble floor, landing between them. A final, undeniable statement. Then she turned, her back straight, her head held high, and walked back into the house, sliding the glass door shut behind her with a soft, definitive click that echoed louder than any gunshot. The click of the door closing was a death knell. For a moment, no one moved. The guests stood like statues in a tableau of exquisite social horror. Then the spell broke. A quiet cough, the shuffle of a shoe, and the retreat began. It wasn't a panicked rush, but a slow, mortified dissolution. Whispers turned to hasty goodbyes. No one made eye contact with Julian. He was no longer the king of the castle. He was a guest who had just been evicted. Marcus was the last to approach him. He picked up the deed from the floor and handed it to Julian, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "You really did it this time, Julian. You really, truly blew it up." He shook his head and walked away, leaving Julian alone on the platform with a ghost. Izzy was still standing there, frozen, the red of her dress now looking garish and cheap. Her face was a wreck of shattered illusions. "She's pregnant?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "You told me you were separated. You told me it was over." It is over," Julian stammered, his mind a chaotic whirl, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Is it?" Izzy's voice rose, laced with a hysterical edge. She owns the house? The one you paraded me around in? And she's having your baby? She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. My God, what was I? Some kind of prop for your midlife crisis? Izzy, that's not Don't, she snapped, taking a step back from him as if he were contaminated. Don't you dare say my name. You didn't just lie to her, Julian. You lied to me. The humiliation had burned away any affection she might have had, leaving only raw, furious pride. She turned on her heel and practically fled, her stilettos clicking an angry rhythm on the marble as she disappeared into the night. Julian was left alone on the terrace of a home that was no longer his, the cool night air feeling like a shroud. The wreckage was absolute. He had not just lost his wife, he had lost his home, his dignity, and the carefully constructed image of himself as a man in control. The silence that remained was accusing. He tried the door, locked, of course. He walked the perimeter of the house, his house, looking in through the massive windows. He could see Eleanor inside. She was moving with a slow, methodical purpose, gathering the discarded champagne flutes, placing them on a tray. She wasn't breaking them. She wasn't throwing things. She was simply cleaning up his mess, erasing the party, erasing him from her space. He banged on the glass once. Eleanor, Ellie, please, we need to talk. She didn't even look up. It was as if he didn't exist. Defeated, he slumped against the cold glass. The city lights below, which had looked like his kingdom an hour ago, now seemed to mock him. A million tiny, indifferent eyes. He had wanted the world, and in his greed, he had lost his entire universe. He pulled out his phone and booked the presidential suite at the most expensive hotel downtown. The irony was suffocating. He could buy anything he wanted, except a key to his own front door. As he walked down the long, winding driveway, away from the warm lights of the house and into the darkness, he understood that he wasn't just leaving a piece of property. He was walking into exile. The hotel suite was a caricature of luxury. Gilded faucets, silk sheets, a view that cost more than his father's first car. It was opulent and completely empty. For 3 days, Julian rattled around the cavernous space like a ghost, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, looping monologue in his own head. He'd tried calling Eleanor. Her number went straight to voicemail after the first ring. Blocked. He'd emailed. No response. He'd even sent a pathetic, pleading text to her sister, who had replied with a single, blistering sentence. You have done enough damage, Julian. Leave her alone. Stripped of his home, his wife, and the intoxicating distraction of his affair, Julian was forced to confront the one person he'd been running from his entire life, himself. The man in the mirror was a stranger. His tailored suits felt like a costume, his confident smile a grotesque mask. He found himself thinking about their beginning, not the $1 million beginning, but the real one, the tiny, drafty apartment with mismatched furniture. He'd been a frantic, insecure coder with a wild idea, and she was the brilliant architecture student who saw something in him no one else did, including himself. He remembered her staying up all night with him, not just for moral support, but to help him storyboard his business plan on a massive corkboard, her design skills giving shape to his chaotic thoughts. He remembered her sacrifice. When his company finally took off, she was on the cusp of her own breakthrough, a partnership offer from a prestigious firm, but he'd been overwhelmed, drowning in the sudden success. I need you, Ellie, he'd said, just for a year or two, until things stabilize. And she had agreed. She put her portfolio away and became his anchor, his strategist, his chief of staff, his everything. The years had slipped by and he'd never encouraged her to go back. Her quiet strength became the foundation he built his empire on, a foundation he took so for granted he'd forgotten it was there. And Izzy. In the harsh light of sobriety and shame, he saw the affair for what it was. It wasn't love. It was validation. Izzy looked at him the way the world did, as Julian Vance, the millionaire. She was impressed by the watch on his wrist, the car in his garage, the name on the building. She was a reflection of his success. But Eleanor had loved Julian, the broke, anxious kid who was terrified of failing. She hadn't just loved him. She had built him. and he had repaid her by trying to replace her with a cheaper, shinier model. The pregnancy. That was the knife that twisted deepest. A baby. Their baby. He tried to picture it. A tiny human being with his eyes and Eleanor's smile. A child who would grow up in a broken home because of his ego. The thought was a physical agony. It hollowed him out, leaving behind a raw, echoing guilt. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a failure as a father before he'd even begun. On the fourth day, he stopped drinking the expensive scotch from the minibar. He pushed away the room service cart. He sat at the polished mahogany desk, pulled out a piece of hotel stationery, and began to write. Not an excuse, not a plea for forgiveness, just the truth. He wrote about his fear, the deep, dark poverty of his childhood that made him feel like an imposter in his own life. He wrote about how he'd confused net worth with self-worth. He wrote about how he'd betrayed the only person who had ever seen the real him and loved him anyway. He filled page after page, the ink bleeding with a shame so profound it felt like it was dissolving his bones. He didn't know if he would ever send it, but for the first time in years, he was being honest. And it was excruciating. While Julian was spiraling in his gilded cage, Eleanor was breathing. For the first few days, every breath was a conscious effort. The pain was a physical presence, a weight on her chest that made it hard to stand. She walked through the silent, cavernous house, a home she had designed to be filled with light and laughter, and felt every echo of her broken dreams. She allowed herself to cry. She lay on the floor of what was supposed to be the nursery and wept until she was empty, mourning the man she thought she'd married and the future she thought they'd had. But Eleanor was the daughter of an engineer and the granddaughter of a farmer. She was built of practical, resilient stock. After 3 days of grieving, she got up. The baby inside her was a constant, gentle reminder that her life was no longer just her own. She had a new purpose, one that eclipsed the pain of Julian's betrayal. She called her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara. She laid out the facts calmly and clinically: the public infidelity, the ownership of the house, the pregnancy. "So what do you want, Eleanor?" Clara asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Do you want to destroy him? Because trust me, we can." Eleanor thought for a long moment, her hand resting on her stomach. The old Eleanor, the one from a week ago, might have said yes, but revenge felt like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It was an anchor, and she needed to swim. "No," Eleanor said, her voice clear. "I don't want to destroy him. I just want him to be gone. I want a divorce that is clean and fair, and I want to figure out how he's going to be a father to this child, because I will not let my baby grow up without one just because his is an idiot." The decision galvanized her. It was a pivot from victim to architect of her own future. She packed up Julian's things. She meticulously folded his expensive suits, boxed his watches, and arranged for it all to be sent to his office, an act not of anger but of closure. Erasing his physical presence was the first step to healing the emotional void. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She went into her old home office, a room that had slowly filled with household clutter, and she unrolled her old architectural drafts. The paper was crisp, the lines precise. She looked at her designs: community centers, libraries, sustainable housing projects. They were full of hope and ingenuity. This was who she was. She had forgotten. She started sketching again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She designed a small extension for the house, a sun-drenched playroom. She redesigned the nursery. She was taking the home they had built together and making it solely her own, infusing it with her own strength, her own future. Her best friend, Sarah, came over with groceries and a shoulder to cry on, and was stunned to find Eleanor at her drafting table, her face illuminated by the glow of the lamp, looking more herself than she had in years. "I thought I'd find you in a puddle of tears and ice cream," Sarah said, marveling. Eleanor looked up, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I did that already. It gets boring." She gestured around the room. "I realized I put all my energy into building Julian's world. I think it's time I started building my own again." She was hurt, yes. The betrayal ran deep, but beneath the pain, Eleanor Vance was rediscovering the one person she could always count on, herself. A week later, a thick envelope arrived by courier. It was hotel stationery, covered in Julian's familiar, messy script. Eleanor's first instinct was to throw it away, to burn it. But her curiosity, and perhaps a lingering sliver of the woman who had once loved him, won out. She sat at her kitchen island, the morning sun streaming in, and read. It wasn't what she expected. There were no pleas for her to take him back, no justifications for his behavior. It was a confession, a raw, self-lacerating inventory of his fears, his ego, and his catastrophic failures. He didn't ask for her forgiveness. He stated plainly that he didn't deserve it. The letter ended with a single, humble request. I have ruined my chance to be your husband. Please, Eleanor, don't let me ruin my chance to be a father. I will do whatever you ask. I just want to be there for our child. The words cracked through her armor. This was the Julian she remembered, the vulnerable, honest man hidden beneath layers of success and arrogance. It didn't erase the pain, but it changed its texture. She agreed to meet him. Not in a lawyer's office, not in her home, but on neutral ground. A public park halfway between the house and the city, a place with no memories attached. When she saw him waiting on a bench near the duck pond, she barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. The designer suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. The confident, cocksure energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, heavy humility. He looked tired. He looked broken. He stood up as she approached, his hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm not here for you, Julian," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down. "I'm here for this baby." She placed a protective hand on her stomach. He nodded, his eyes falling to her hand, then quickly away, as if looking was a privilege he hadn't earned. "I know, I understand." The silence between them was thick with everything unsaid. The years of love, the ugly betrayal, the chasm that now lay between them. "I read your letter," she said finally. "Eleanor, Don't," she cut him off. "I don't want to hear apologies. Apologies are words. I need to know what you're going to do." This was the moment, the climax of their personal tragedy. He took a deep breath, meeting her gaze for the first time. His eyes were clear of deception, filled only with a profound, aching regret. "Okay," he said softly. "First, I ended it with Isabel. Cleanly. I took full responsibility. She resigned from the company." He paused. "I'm selling my majority share in Vance Holdings. I've started the process. The money, the pressure, it poisoned me. I'm keeping a small consulting role, enough to live on, but I'm getting out of that world." Eleanor was stunned into silence. He was giving up his empire, the thing he had sacrificed everything for. "I've started therapy," he continued, his voice gaining a bit of strength, "to deal with me, to figure out why I did what I did so I never, ever become that man again." He finally looked her straight in the eye. "I will sign any divorce agreement your lawyer puts in front of me. I will provide whatever child support is required, and then some. I will give you the house, the investments, anything. It's all yours. It should have been all along." He stopped, his throat working. "All I ask, is to be involved. I'll go to the doctor's appointments. I'll sit in the waiting room if you want. I'll learn how to change a diaper. I'll read the books. I'll do the work. I want our child to know that his father didn't just walk away." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, hot and unexpected. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a complex, heart-wrenching catharsis. He had finally understood. He had stripped away the lies, the ego, the millions, and found the man he was supposed to be. It was too late for them. But perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late for their child. She finally sat down on the bench, a foot of space between them. "The first ultrasound is on Tuesday," she said quietly. "It's at 10. A wave of relief so profound washed over Julian's face that he seemed to deflate. He nodded, unable to speak, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. It wasn't a reconciliation, it was a truce. It was the first fragile brick in a new foundation. The path forward was not a straight line, but a series of awkward, tentative steps. True to his word, Julian was at the hospital the following Tuesday. He didn't presume to come into the examination room, but sat in the waiting area, anxiously flipping through a year-old magazine. When Eleanor came out, clutching a small, grainy photo, he stood up, his face a mess of hope and fear. She hesitated for a moment, then held out the picture. "It's a girl," she said, her voice soft. He took the photo as if it were a sacred artifact. He stared at the tiny, flickering image, and his composure broke. He leaned against the wall, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was the first time she had seen him cry since his mother's funeral. In that moment, he wasn't a millionaire or an ex-husband. He was just a father, overwhelmed by the miracle and the magnitude of it all. Julian threw himself into preparation with a quiet, desperate fervor. Packages began arriving at the house. Not extravagant, useless gifts, but things he had clearly researched: the highest-rated car seat, an organic mattress, a library of classic children's books. He sent Eleanor articles on nutrition in the 3rd trimester and links to online birthing classes he was taking by himself. He never crossed her boundaries. He would text, not call. He'd ask permission to drop something off on the porch. He was giving her space, proving with actions, not words, that he respected her. He sold his shares in the company, a move that sent shockwaves through the financial world. News articles painted him as a failure, a man who'd lost it all. But Eleanor knew the truth. He was finally finding it. One afternoon, she was struggling to assemble a complex crib. Frustrated and hormonal, she was on the verge of tears when her doorbell rang. It was Julian. "I was just dropping off some diapers," he said, gesturing to a box on the porch. He peered past her and saw the confusing mess of wooden slats and screws on the floor. "Looks complicated." "It's impossible," she sighed, running a hand through her hair. An older, more arrogant Julian would have taken over. This Julian just stood there. Would you like some help?" he asked, his tone gentle. "I'm pretty good with Swedish instructions." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." For the next hour, they worked together in a comfortable, focused silence. They didn't talk about the past. They talked about cam locks and dowel rods. They built something together, not a house or a life, but a simple crib. When it was done, it stood strong and steady in the nursery. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental, a tiny, sturdy bridge across a vast canyon. The call came at 3 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in April. Julian had been sleeping on the couch in his new modest apartment, his phone on the pillow beside him. He answered before the first ring finished. It was Eleanor's friend, Sarah. "Her water broke. We're on our way to St. Mary's." He was there in 15 minutes, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found Sarah in the waiting room. "How is she?" "She's a rock star. She's asking for you," Sarah said, her eyes studying him. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "Go on back, room 302. The scene in the delivery room wasn't the magical, reconciled moment of a Hollywood movie. It was real. It was tense and raw. Eleanor was in pain, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were fierce with determination. When she saw him, a flicker of relief crossed her face. "You came," she breathed between contractions. "I told you I would," he said, his voice thick. He didn't know what to do, so he did what she had once done for him. He became her support. He got her ice chips. He held a cool cloth to her forehead. He murmured encouragement, telling her how strong she was. He stayed in the background, a quiet presence, letting the nurses and her doctor take the lead. He was not the hero this story. He was a supporting actor, and he knew it. Hours later, after a final monumental effort from Eleanor, the room was filled with the sound of a powerful, healthy cry. Their daughter had arrived. A nurse cleaned her and wrapped her in a blanket, handing the tiny bundle to Eleanor. Eleanor looked down at her daughter's face, and the world, with all its pain and betrayal, simply fell away. There was only this perfect tiny person. After a long moment, she looked up at Julian, who was standing by the door, tears streaming down his face. "Julian," she said softly. He walked over to the bed, his legs unsteady. "Do you want to hold your daughter?" she asked. He could only nod. She carefully transferred the warm, wriggling bundle into his arms. He looked down at the baby, at her tiny clenched fists, the dusting of dark hair so like his own. He felt her small weight in his arms, and a love so fierce and absolute washed through him, cleansing the last vestiges of his shame. This was real. This was worth everything. This was redemption. He looked at Eleanor, who was watching him with tired, knowing eyes. "Her name is Hope," she whispered. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and quiet moments of wonder. They settled into a new kind of normal, a carefully choreographed dance of co-parenting. Julian's life now revolved around Hope's schedule. He was there 2 or 3 days a week, not as a visitor but as a father. He learned to change diapers, to master the swaddle, to walk the floors with a colicky baby at 2 a.m., so Eleanor could get a few precious hours of sleep. He never stayed the night. He respected the boundaries of her home, a home that was now filled with baby laughter and the scent of formula. He would come. He would care for his daughter with a devotion that humbled Eleanor, and then he would leave, retreating to his own quiet apartment. The house was no longer a symbol of their broken marriage, but a sanctuary for their daughter. Eleanor had flourished. She'd taken on a few freelance architectural projects. Her creativity sparked anew. She was a mother, yes, but she was also Eleanor again, strong, independent, and at peace. One evening, about 6 months after Hope was born, Julian was over for his turn with the late-night feeding. Eleanor was supposed to be asleep, but she came downstairs for a glass of water. She paused in the doorway of the living room, watching. Julian was sitting in the rocking chair, a gift from her parents, gently rocking a sleeping Hope against his chest. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of a nightlight. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't watching TV. He was just looking down at his daughter's face with an expression of pure, unconditional love. He started humming a soft, tuneless melody, the same one his own mother used to hum to him. He must have sensed her presence because he looked up. Their eyes met across the quiet room. There was no tension, no lingering anger. The space between them was no longer a chasm of betrayal, but a bridge of shared love for the little girl in his arms. He didn't ask to come back. She didn't offer. Their old life was gone, and they both knew it couldn't be rebuilt. But here, in the quiet darkness, they had built something new. Not a marriage, but a family, a broken thing made whole in a different shape. Julian gave her a small, sad, grateful smile. Eleanor returned it. It wasn't a Hollywood ending, but it was a real one. It was a quiet understanding. It was forgiveness. It was hope. Julian and Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that betrayal doesn't have to be the end. It shows us that true strength is found not in revenge, but in resilience, and that redemption is earned through actions, not words. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we rebuild from the ashes of what we've lost. What did you think of Julian's path to redemption? Could you forgive him if you were Eleanor? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if their story touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are possible. Subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that explore the complexities of the human heart.